What is your happiest moment?
What does it look like? Did you get a smile when you thought about it? Did you have to think for a minute when I asked you that question? What is my happiest moment? Let me ask you a different question. What's the worst moment in your entire life? Like the worst thing that's ever happened to you? We're going to pass a microphone and everyone's going to share. Just kidding. You can open your eyes. For some of you, it was that right there. I have a hunch, though I'm probably not 100% accurate, I have a hunch that for most of you, it was easier to answer the second question. Right? I said, what's your happiest moment? And you're like, gosh, I don't know. There's probably so many of them. I just can't think of any right now. I'm like, what's your saddest moment? It was August. It was cold outside. I don't know why I picked August. Why is that? Why is it that, for whatever reason, our brains just latch on to the worst things? I'm sure if I gave you enough time, you could make a really long list of great things that happened to you. I'm sure if I gave you that same amount of time, you could make twice as long a list of the worst things that have ever happened to you. And I don't think it matters how long you've been alive. I don't think that the older you are, the longer your list gets. I think the older you are, the more detailed your list gets. The clearer you see things, the larger the scale of the things you write down. I'm just going to say I'm right because I'm looking at faces and no one seems to be disagreeing. I don't get a lot of head shaking. But so here's the question though. Why is that? Why are we wired to remember the worst stuff? I think, I don't know that I'm right about this either. Not a psychiatrist, not a psychologist, didn't study the brain. But I think that the Bible can tell us. There's something really interesting that it tells us. It tells us in more than one place and in more than one way that there are two ways in which we find humanity. We'll call it before and after. I said we were all Barabbas because every single one of us has that experience. And if you haven't, if you can't think of a time in your life where you were compared to somebody who was just infinitely better than you, it exists somewhere back there. And if you can't, and let's say you just have the best life ever, I have really bad news. The average adult human lives to roughly 80 years old. There are older people than 80. I read about a place in Europe where there are people that are living to like 110, and they still go on morning walks. I don't know that I want to get that far. But so however far you go, there's an end point. And your end point looks a lot like Barabbas and Jesus in front of a crowd. There's one difference, though. Instead of a crowd of people, and remember there was that footnote in the text that I read at the beginning. It said that they had Jesus arrested out of envy. At this point in your story, it's not a bunch of people who are envious. It is a single person. It is the person that created the world we exist on. It is the person who named you in your mother's womb. He knows every hair on your head, which is easier for some than others. He understands. One giggle, that's good. He gets this world because he made this world. He made everything in it. He made you. He made your friends. He made your family. He made the space where this is going to take place. And it's his son next to you. And his son did nothing wrong. His son was perfect. And before you're like, hold on, I'm a good person. I'm not going to do any of one of those like, raise your hand if you think you've done a good job in life. It's usually the quietest person in the room who disagrees when I make that joke. It's like, well, hold on. I'm not going to like start anything, but like I'm actually a pretty good person. Maybe you've just never met me. I don't know. In the Psalms, David says that he was born in sin. He was conceived in it, and he was born in sin. And it's easy to look at babies and be like, they're not sinful, and then they poop their diapers. And if you had to change it, you understand sin. And if you're responsible for that baby and they're hungry, you understand what it means to be born in sin, because that baby does not care if you are tired. That baby does not care if you are exhausted, if you haven't eaten, if you have a broken leg. That baby doesn't care. That baby doesn't care if you are actually dying. He's hungry, she's hungry, feed me. That's our nature. Most people don't ever grow out of that. They just form different sounds. So for a baby, it's like incoherent noises, and you're like, oh, that means food. For an adult, it's perhaps coherent noises, but if you've ever encountered, for those of you that are married, we'll just pick on men for a minute. You ever said something you had to apologize for because you were hungry? Right? You ever walked in the door because your wife is like amazing in the kitchen, and you walk in and it doesn't smell delicious in your house, and you're like, I thought you were going to make dinner tonight. What? You don't know about the day I had. I'm hungry. Couple of you, right? I heard kids giggle. Was that Dad? They're like, was he in my house? So we don't ever grow out of that. And sometimes it's a little more subtle than that, actually. Most of the time, it's a lot more subtle than that. Most of the time, these sinful thoughts that babies just shout at the top of their lungs happen in your head. She doesn't look that good in that dress. Somebody gets an award. I don't think they really deserve that. And there's no one in this world that's immune to that. You could be a churchgoer your entire life. You've never studied the Bible. You just trust what your pastor says. And then every Sunday morning, you're like, is that true? I wouldn't have said it that way. I did that with my seminary professors, people with like 30 years of studying 4 words in Hebrew, and that's the only thing that they've specialized in. And I'm like, are you sure it means that? Because I'm an expert now. That it's just our nature. So in the Bible, Barabbas is described as an insurrectionist. Not a person who committed insurrection. He's labeled as if it's just natural to him. This is the kind of person he is. You have that moment coming. I don't know what kind of person you are, but it's not an awesome one. And you're going to sit next to Jesus, and he's the benchmark. And maybe you are a good person, but you're not a perfect person. I heard a comedian once talk about how he heard a bunch of people telling their testimonies, and there was a guy that was like, oh, I recovered from a heroin addiction, and now I love Jesus. And the comedian was like, I wish I had a heroin addiction. I want an overcoming story. So, okay, maybe you don't have a heroin addiction in your history. Maybe you've never, I don't know. You ever been mad at somebody? Like really mad at somebody? Like unjustly mad at somebody? Like, I don't know why I hate you right now, but just get out of my face or I'm going to choke you. And probably because none of you are like wearing prison garb like you didn't. But you've all felt that. Maybe it was your spouse. For goodness sake, put the seat down. 25 years, I don't ask for much. We all have this. It's like an internal monologue. I want to read you one more thing. Not from Matthew's gospel, actually. This time we're going to read from the Gospel of Luke. So we just experienced earlier the judgment. Jesus was sent off to be flogged, is the word that gets used. In the Hebrew, it's actually, or in the Greek rather, it's a little bit of a weird translation thing. So if you're not like a really nerdy words person, don't tune out for a minute. You're going to think this is neat. Or not. You're going to be like, this guy has too much time on his hands. That word is a very specific punishment. Matthew took the time to tell you what kind of weapon was used, but not how it was used. Here's how it was used. It was a lead-tipped whip. And the Romans, they were amazing. They figured out all kinds of stuff. They figured out exactly how many times, with what strength, and from what angle you can beat a person, so that you can literally see their bones and they're not dead. So That's what they did to Jesus. The dude who did nothing wrong. Be like you're sitting in class and the class like genius, the person who like everybody loves, like for those of you that are like pop culture, like this is the Sheldon Cooper of your class. That landed with somebody, I don't know. And that person gets detention and you're like, wait, not him. That's what just happened to and everybody got to see it. So they beat him mercilessly. You can see the back of his rib cage. You could poke at his spinal cord. I don't know what organs are closest to the back. If there's a nurse in the room, I don't know. But like that area of your body, like you could play with it. Like that's how exposed he was. And then they're like, take a nap. You got more stuff coming, bro. So they send him back to prison. And then the guards get their little jaunt with him and they dress him up all funny and they make fun of him and they shout things at him. And then you get to crucifixion time. And so I want you to understand, Barabbas was expecting this. And so was Jesus. Barabbas was deserving of this. And so were you. But Jesus. So the Gospel of Luke, chapter 23. 2 others, both criminals, were led out to be executed with him. When they came to a place called Golgotha, which literally just translates as the skull place, they nailed him to a cross. This is not life-size, but it's close. Most of you have not lifted one of these. This one's hollow, it's cheating. The cross that they would have had him nailed to was just 2 giant pieces of lumber that they forced together. It wasn't artfully crafted. There wasn't little notches cut out so that it was nice and smooth. It was rope right here that was holding it together. And they nailed him to it. The nails were roughly 9 inches long. They weighed just over 2 pounds. The nail was 2 pounds. Process with that. I don't know if you've ever built anything. I'm not a builder, ask my wife, but I can process 2 pounds in a nail. So you had a nail in this hand and a nail in this hand. And then you were pressed against the back of the cross. You were pressed against it because it was laying down. They did this on the ground so that they could beat on it to shove the nails through you. And I don't know if you've ever poked yourself with anything. Your body's designed to resist that stuff. So I told you what his back looked like. Now he's laying on his back against a piece of wood. And this one's nice and smooth, right? That one wasn't, probably. In all likelihood, it was used. So we often think of the majesty of the Mount of Calvary and there's these 3 crosses, but that's the same 3 crosses they always use. So there's untold numbers of people's weird congealed stuff. Kids in the room. On this cross that he's laying on. Ever burnt yourself and then touched something with the tender skin? I'm going to do a weird biology lesson for a minute. We have hundreds of layers of really thin skin, and when you burn yourself, you burn off a dozen or so, and it's the most painful thing you've ever experienced. I worked in the hair industry for a lot of years, don't ask. And so I used a flat iron a lot, and I was bad at it. And then I wasn't, because I burned myself enough that I learned you don't do that. But there was still 100 plus layers of skin there. So process what if there wasn't? And he's laying against it. And then they have him cross his feet, which is the part that no one ever thinks about. I hate feet. I choose not to think about this part, but you should. They had him cross his feet, ballerina style. And the reason for that is something you don't typically notice on stage crosses. It's because roughly here, where his feet would have been almost, there was a ledge, 2-3 inches deep, a little ledge. It would have been roughly 1.5 inches too far for him to stand on. And then they positioned his feet in such a way that if he tore at the flesh in his own skin, he could reach that little platform. And then they nailed his feet together into the wood. It's not even up yet. It's just on the ground. So then they lift it up and they slide it into a hole. So I can't even think of an example of like a way in which you can process that experience. Like that bump you get on the highway when you have a migraine and you look at your husband, ladies, and you're like, could you not? And he's like, this is the road. It's literally not my driving. And you don't care because it hurt. And you're like, drive better. And in his head, he's like, I am. Everyone looked at it was great. That was, okay. That's maybe the closest thing I can think of to that experience, except that it's like viscerally painful. Not like, oh, I'm sorry, your head hurts, but like viscerally painful. And that's the beginning. That's how it started. So, okay, you've got a criminal on his right and a criminal on his left. It says, Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. And the soldiers began to gamble for his clothes by throwing dice or casting lots. The crowd watched and the leaders scoffed. He saved others, they said. Let him save himself if he really is God's Messiah, the chosen one. Like, you've got to process, like, this is like the most sarcastic person you've ever met narrating your execution. The soldiers mocked him too by offering him a drink of sour wine. And this is not, I'm not going to get into like the details of the wine of the day, but like this is not box wine that you just aren't a fan of. This is like apple cider vinegar that no one told you was apple cider vinegar. They said, here, this is apple. And you're like, oh, apple juice, great. That was not apple juice. Like that was the trick that they're playing. But it was not just bad tasting, it was bad. So the word there, the word sour, could actually be spoiled. They gave him bad wine. They poisoned the guy dying. Like it's insult to injury, okay? They called out to him, if you are the king of the Jews, which for the record is the sign above his head, because that's how they did it. They put a sign. And Jesus, for no reason, like we say that it was because he was the Messiah that he got this treatment, it's prophesied and whatever. But like there was no earthly reason, if not that God had decreed that he would be put on display, that they would list his crime in 3 languages. But that's what they did. The common language, the trade language of the empire, and Hebrew just because. It said King of the Jews. And the Jews were mad about it. They didn't. It's not in the text that we're going to read, but they're like, couldn't you just call it he said he was the King of the Jews? And the Pilate was like, nope, this is what he's trying. This is what he's been crucified. This is it. King of the Jews. And they're like, that's not what we said, bro. Anyway, this is the King of the Jews. And then it says, one of the criminals hanging beside him scoffed. Remember, these people are guilty of the same crime. They're insurrectionists. The same crime that Barabbas, was guilty of. One of the criminals hanging beside him scoffed. So you're the Messiah, are you? Prove it by saving yourself and us too while you're at it. This is the person who looks at it. So for the Christians in the room, have you ever been in a place where somebody who's not a Christian goes, well, how come he doesn't just save everybody? Why do I have to love and follow him to be saved? What a hypocrite. You ever heard that? That comes on my social media all the time. I don't know why. But that's just like a posture people have. What kind of God do you have that he won't just save everybody? That's criminal 1. Criminal 2 on the other side says, but the other criminal protested, don't you fear God even when you've been sentenced to die? Like, you're about to meet him. Shut up. Pastor said shut up on Friday. It's going to happen. We deserve to die for our crime. So like he's come to terms with it. He's like, this is where I am. This is what I've done. This is how I've earned my keep. It says, but this man hasn't done anything wrong. Then he looks at Jesus. And he says, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Jesus is going to respond. We're going to get to that. I want you to process the likely 10 seconds in between here. How did I describe this guy? He was a criminal. He was guilty. He was you. He was me. Jesus, would you remember me when you come into your kingdom? Or like, to put it a different way, can you save me right now? I don't deserve it, but like, please. It's like when your kid's grounded and they come out of their room and they're like, can I have a cookie? Like, I'm grounded, but like, can I have a cookie? That's the moment. They're suffering and dying, right? So I imagine that these conversations weren't like quick, So let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's say there's 15 seconds. It takes Jesus 15 seconds of like, I got to muster the breath. Because remember, crucifixion is actually not a death that you die because of blood loss. You're drowning. Like your lungs are filling with fluid, which is why that little ledge I mentioned is such a bad thing. Because when you press down, not only are you ripping at the flesh at your feet, but you're like getting above the water to get a breath, which prolongs how long it takes you to die. It's awful. The Babylonians are credited with inventing the cross as a method of torturing people. The Romans figured out if you do it long enough, they die. So the Romans are like experts at this, right? So in that 15 to 30 second period, do you know what doesn't happen? If you're taking notes, write this down. If you're not taking notes, write this down. What doesn't happen is he doesn't learn the Bible. He doesn't clean himself up. He doesn't memorize a catechism. He doesn't go to school. He doesn't find a church. He doesn't plug into a community. He just keeps dying while he waits for an answer. It says, Jesus replied, I assure you, which, again, because I'm a weird and I like languages, it's in the perfect tense, meaning like there's no possibility what I'm about to say is not true. A Gen Z would say, for real, for real. No cap. He says, I assure you, today you will be with me in paradise. So like, I'm going, you're going, we're going. By this time, it was about noon. So if you're keeping track, this is 3 hours they've been dangling. And darkness fell across the whole land until 3 o'clock. The light from the sun was gone. If you're not familiar with, like, you can go to this hill. There's nothing to block the sun. There's not like, some points like there's trees in the way and you're like, oh, it got dark for a minute, or there's cloud. There's nothing to do that. Another 9-minute or so Google search might actually show you that NASA's been doing this thing where they chart out eclipses forwards and backwards so that they can get a detailed descriptions of how the sun actually works. And they discovered that on the exact day that clerk I mentioned earlier recorded in AD 34 the death of Jesus, there was a solar eclipse, a complete solar eclipse. It was dark in the middle of the day. So if you're like, the Bible makes things up, NASA. Because everybody knows someone that's like, follow the science. To which I reply, oh, the science caught up. The Bible already told us that, but now you know how it happened. Good for you. Anyway. The light from the sun was gone, and suddenly the curtain in the sanctuary of the temple was torn down the middle, which maybe doesn't mean anything to you, but for a Jew, that's a really big deal. The curtain is not like a window curtain. It's like a 20-foot tall curtain that separates the place where they believed God dwelt from literally everyone else. So like only holy people could go into the temple, which was no one. So there was one person who could make a sacrifice by killing a goat and covering themselves in blood. It sounds ridiculous. It made sense then. And they went into the temple for just like an hour. So like 365 days of a year, they went in for an hour. They talked to the Lord. They came out. That was it. The temple gets torn in two. Everyone freaks out. Why? Because now they're in the literal presence of God all the time. There's nothing protecting them. And they have absolutely no idea that this dude on a hill outside the town where the temple is dying for them. It says, then Jesus shouted. And what's really neat, before I tell you what he shouted, is there would have been a really large crowd. We have a number of accounts of this experience. There are 4 Gospels. All 4 of them tell this story. And you get a different piece of this moment in each of the 4 because they would have been standing in different places. So Matthew would have been like mid-crowd. He's not in the front. He's not in the back. He's like lost in the middle, afraid for his life. He doesn't want to he was one of Jesus' followers. He's like freaking out. John was in the front, standing next to Jesus' mother. John heard something he felt was most important for his reader to know. Matthew heard something he felt his reader was supposed to know. Luke, who writes this gospel, was a doctor who believed in recounting history, and so he interviewed Peter, who was also there, somewhere in the crowd. So you hear a couple of things. This is what Luke thought was most important about the account, hearing from Peter, one of the disciples. Father, I entrust my spirit into your hands. And with those words, he breathed his last. He decided, this is it, I'm finished. Actually, in one of the other gospel accounts, that's what you're told he says. He says, "It is finished. I'm done." There's no possible way he was saying that he was done like he's dying. That there's no possible way that he meant that. How do I know? Well, because that's not how crucifixion works. You drown. You cannot drown and talk. You can't. You ever met someone who's drowning? They didn't talk to you. They didn't. Like, I know that sounds really dumb, but like they didn't talk to you. They were drowning. They had no air in their lungs. That's what you need to talk. They didn't talk to you. So, physically speaking, he had time. Actually, the rest of the story, as it pans out, you're told that they had to send someone to make sure he was dead, so they rammed a spear into the side of his rib cage, because there's like no way he's dead. This takes 18, 20, 24, 30 hours. Like, people die slowly. The Romans thought it was hysterical. There's no way he's dead. What do you mean he's dead? It's been 6 hours. I want my money back. So they run a spear into his side, and out pours water and blood. So scientifically speaking, he drowned to death. That's what your body does. It fills up with fluid. So it's not literal water. You couldn't drink it. I guess you could. You'd be weird. But that's what comes out. So he's very dead. Like, he's just very dead. There's nothing not dead about him. He's very dead. He's so dead. Here's what's funny. And maybe I shouldn't use that word. Here's what's ironic. Barabbas was probably in that crowd. Not because he wanted to, but because if I'm getting out of jail and I'm being told, "You're free, you no longer have any burden on you whatsoever," you know what I'm doing? I'm going home. I'm going to get clean clothes. I've been in jail a while. If I'm married, I'm kissing my wife. I'm hugging my kids. I am thanking whoever it is that I worship that I am not on a cross right now. Barabbas was not a Jewish citizen, so he didn't live in Jerusalem. And there's only one way out, and you got to pass that hill. That's why the hill is there. That's why Rome does that, so that anybody coming in and anybody going out knows, I need to follow the rules when I'm here because Rome owns this place, and those guys look uncomfortable. So he had to walk through this crowd, and I guarantee you it was not one of those, "Excuse me, can I get by?" "Oh, thank you." It just wasn't. So probably he got stuck somewhere in this crowd, and then he had to watch. He had to watch as a man who was fully and 100% righteous, unguilty, for lack of a better way to say that, hang on a cross that they literally made for me. Like, that was I had a ticket. I was going there. I'd said my goodbyes. I'd told my family I loved them. I had apologized to whomever I was going to apologize for. I had given final speeches. I had sold off all of my stuff. I was done. This was where I was going. This is where I should go. This is where you should go. Because you're not a good person. Because I'm not a good person. So what do we do with that? Like, what do you actually do? If you're a believer in this room, then praise God for you and the walk that you have. And if you're not, or if you're not sure, you just don't know where that balance is, or maybe there's this word that I discovered a couple of months ago, that you're de-churched. You had a church life once, and then the church sucks, and so it hurts you somehow, and so now you're not. Which is more people in Fremont than I would prefer. What do you do with that information? If you are not joyfully in relationship with Jesus, then you are in that 15 to 30 seconds between, "Can I join you in paradise?" and Jesus' response. And so I'm going to go back and I'm going to repeat to you what happens in that 15 to 30 seconds. Nothing happened. He did not clean himself up. He did not get right with Jesus. He just said, "I'm dying. Can you help?" Dying, can you help? I would like to give you guys some instructions for this "I'm dying, can you help" moment. And then I'm going to invite our praise team back up here, and They're going to do 2 more songs. As you came in, there was a card and a pen on your chair. If there wasn't, it's because we ran out of pens. Look next to you, because we did every other chair. Here's what I want you to do. And no one's going to force you, and I'm not going to watch and, I don't know, maybe I will. Because I'm a sinner and I like to, I don't know. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to think about those awful moments that you thought about earlier. I want you to think about the worst things in your life. I want you to think about the things that you've done that put you on your proverbial cross. Why are you hanging there? Why are there nails in your hands? Why do your feet hurt? Why are your lungs filling up with blood? Why do you deserve this? And remember, there aren't good people. So if you're like, I don't, try harder. Why? That's what I want you to write down. Because in reality, that's the offer. That's what Jesus does when he responds. Jesus' response is not, let's work on that. Here's a couple of passages I'd like you to memorize, and a brand of clothing I think would look nice on you. Here's the brand of soap you should use to clean yourself up. And then after you've done all that, I'm going to sit you down with one of the elders at my church, and you're going to walk through a program with him, and you're going to learn a bunch of stuff, and then you're going to stand in front of the congregation, and you're going to present, and then it's going to be... He doesn't do any of that. He says, I got you. He's never coming down off that cross. That dude is not getting better. You ever have one of those moments where you're sick and you're like, am I getting better or am I getting worse? He is getting worse. He's not going to a doctor. No one is going to care for him. He doesn't need a hug. He needs a coffin. Like that is for sure. And so why am I digging into that? Because there are people, maybe a couple of you in this room, I don't know, who are like, you don't know me. He won't love me. He can't love me. I've done too much. Can I be with you in paradise? Yes. So I want you to write down whatever's burdening you. And when you're done, there's not a call for this. I'm not going to say, now it's time to move to the next. You're not going to, it's just when you're done. Take all the time you need. Don't sign it. Do surrender it. There's a cross in all 4 corners of this room. At each of those 4 crosses is a little dish with little pins. And I want you to take your card, and I want you to fold your card, and I want you to nail it to one of those crosses, and then come back to your seat. Take all the time you need. Be very honest. It's not a thing that I'm going to then research. You should know as a church, just in case you don't normally attend with us, we believe very strongly in prayer, and we care very much about the lives of all of the people in this area. And so we are going to read them. That's why I made sure to say, don't sign it. We are going to read them, and we're going to pray about each one of those cards for the next 50 days. Why 50 days, Adam? Oh, I'm glad you asked. Because 50 days from Easter Sunday is a day called Pentecost, when God pours out his Spirit on the church. It's the birth of the church. We have an event that we're going to put on that's just about healing. And we're going to light all those cards on fire. There's always someone. Fire. We're going to burn them. They're not going to exist anymore. But I need you to know, in Christ, you give your life to him. You say, hey, can I join you? And they don't exist anymore anyway. It doesn't take 50 days. It doesn't take a church praying for you. It just takes you saying to Jesus, can I come? Can I join you? I'd like to invite everyone to come up here. I'm just going to pray over you as you're writing. Take the time, pick a corner. Lord, thank you that you offer us this opportunity. And God, if there's anybody in this room who's never said yes to you, would you let today be the day? Would you connect them with somebody else in this place? Would you connect them with me? Would you connect them with someone near them who loves you? Lord, would you make it true that as people write down their burdens, that they are actually relieved of them? Would you make it real in their lives that you died for them? Would it be personal? The church is good at saying Jesus died for the world. The Bible's good at saying Jesus died for sinners. And each of us in this room is one. Would you help us to know you better, Lord? Help them to know you better, Lord, and bless them in Jesus' name. Amen.